Pull up a chair. Sit for a moment. You're in a hurry, aren't you? I can see it in the way you hold yourself. That high-tension, buzzing energy that says you've got a world to manage and no time to spare for an old man's stories. I recognize that feeling. I carried it through the 1940s when I thought my ambition was armor, and I felt it in the 70s when I realized the armor was actually a cage. But look at these hands. They've built homes, they've buried lifelong friends, and they've worked until the marrow ached. I am 105 years old. And I'm going to tell you something that might sit heavy in your chest. I spent exactly 100 years doing it all wrong. 1 full century. I spent 10 decades moving forward from things that I never actually settled. I did exactly what you are doing right now. I put distance between myself and my failures. I built new routines. I chased bigger titles, wider influence, and more security to fill the quiet voids in my soul. I told myself that time was a natural healer, and if I just kept walking, eventually the road would lead me far away from the regrets that bit at my heels. But there is a secret about time that no one tells you. Until you're sitting on the very edge of it, looking back. Time doesn't heal a single thing. It just gives you a longer road to carry your heavy bags down. In those rare, quiet moments, the ones where the world finally stops shouting its demands, the weight is still there. Not because of a specific mistake you made last year, but because of something underneath it. You think you're struggling because of the career path that stalled, the wealth you haven't secured, or the legacy that feels out of reach. You think you're mourning a life that could have been. But if you listen to someone who has seen more sunrises than you have days left on this earth, you'll realize something different. You didn't lose a future, you lost an illusion. An illusion that was masking a fear you've been carrying since before you even knew how to work for a living. I'm going to show you why that weight won't leave, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That I know exactly where you're sitting. You've reinvented yourself more than once. You've changed your environment, you've optimized your habits, and you've adopted every new philosophy on growth and resilience that comes your way. You're doing well. That's what you tell your peers when they ask. And you mean it. By every visible measure, you've survived the trials. You're productive. You're respected. But there's a room inside you, isn't there? It's a room you keep locked. You pass it every day on your way to being successful, but you never turn the handle. In that room, the real questions live. Not, how do I scale this project? Or who is winning the race? No, those are distractions. The questions in that room are much quieter and much more dangerous. They sound like this. Why do I feel like a fraud even when I'm winning? Why does every achievement turn into this same, familiar emptiness the moment I touch it? You've been taught that a meaningful life is about staying busy and finding the next peak to climb. But that is like painting a manor house that has a crumbling foundation. It looks grand for a season, but the cracks always return. I spent my 30s, my 60s, and even my 90s declaring myself successful because I had reached a new milestone, a new award, a new level of bank balance, a new city. But I hadn't grown an inch. I had just relocated. Relocating is what you do when you move your furniture but stay in the same haunted house. Moving forward says, I'm done with that chapter. Living says, I finally understand what that chapter was trying to teach me. One gets you out of the cold for a night, but the other teaches you how to keep a fire burning in the middle of a storm. I remember a man I knew back in the 60s. Let's call him Elias. He was a titan of industry. He climbed every ladder he could find. He was wealthy, respected, and feared in his field. But when he finally reached the summit, he sat on my porch and wept. That same low-level dread he felt as a child was still there. That same fear that he was nothing without the noise of his accomplishments. Elias hadn't changed. He had just carried his old shame into a more expensive room. He had spent his life running, only to find he was the one he was running from. Here is the part that is difficult for a mature mind to swallow. We build complex stories to protect ourselves from the truth of our own character. After every failure or setback, we write a script. We say, the market was volatile, or my upbringing was flawed, or the system is rigged against someone like me. These stories are comfortable. They provide us with a villain and a victim. They allow us to point the finger outward so we don't have to look at the palm of our own hand. I watched a man named Thomas do this for 40 years. His story was airtight. He was a brilliant man who never got his big break because of corporate politics and lack of connections. All of it was technically true. But Thomas lived in that story like a fortress. It was his armor. What he refused to see until he was nearly 80, what he simply could not face, was why he sabotaged every genuine opportunity that came his way. He wasn't afraid of failing. He was terrified of succeeding, because if he succeeded, he would have no one left to blame for his inner unhappiness. He wasn't mourning a career. He was mourning the fact that he couldn't win the approval of a father who had been in the ground for half a century. He was trying to solve a childhood problem with an adult job. You see, your struggle has two layers. Most people only ever look at the top one. The first layer is the event itself. The loss of the position, the health crisis, the missed opportunity. That layer is real. It's heavy. It requires effort and intelligence to fix. But that layer passes. Life does take care of that part if you keep moving with purpose. It's the second layer, the one underneath, that never goes away on its own. That layer isn't about the event at all. It's about what that event confirmed for you. Maybe it confirmed that you're fundamentally unlucky. Maybe it confirmed that you only have value if you're producing something of high market value. Maybe it confirmed that you are fundamentally alone, even when the world is applauding your name. These aren't things you think with your intellect. They're things you feel in your marrow. If your earliest memories taught you that you only mattered when you were achieving or perfect, then every failure since is just another brick in that wall. You think you're stressed over a lost contract, but you're actually grieving because that wall just got a little bit higher. Moving forward doesn't fix that. You can become the most powerful person in your field, but if you're still carrying that confirmation inside you, you will either drive yourself into an early grave trying to stay on top, or you will burn the whole enterprise down just to prove you never deserved it anyway. I've seen it happen 1,000 times in my 100 years. People trade one struggle for another, wondering why they still feel like they're starving at a feast. They are looking for the answer in the next thing, never realizing the question is inside them. So, how does the cycle end? Listen closely, because this is the lesson I didn't learn until my 100th birthday. I was sitting in this very chair, watching the shadows lengthen, thinking about a business I lost during the Great Depression. I was still carrying a piece of that shame, even at 100 years old. And suddenly, it clicked. Life's hardships are not a whip. They aren't a punishment from a cruel universe. They aren't proof that you're cursed or that you're a failure as an adult. Pain is a messenger. Think of it like a letter delivered to your door. For 80 years, I had been throwing the letters in the trash. I'd see the envelope, recognize the handwriting of regret or failure, and I'd run. I'd stay busy. I'd start a new company. I'd move to a new town. But the messenger is persistent. If you don't open the letter, he just comes. Back the next day, and the day after that. And he brings a louder knock. The dissatisfaction you're feeling right now, that quiet, nagging sense that something is missing despite your efforts, is the messenger. He's standing at your door, and he's carrying information about something unresolved inside you that has been waiting, quietly, to be seen for a very long time. Every time you moved forward, without opening that message, the next crisis in your life was just a different delivery boy for the same letter. The situation changed. The decade changed, but the content was exactly the same. The struggle ends, and I mean truly ends, where the noise in your head stops for good, not when you finally achieve your goals. It ends when you finally sit down on the porch, take the messenger by the hand, and read the lettered "It ends" when you look at what your life struggles have confirmed for you and you ask yourself the hardest question of all. Is this actually true? Is it true that I only matter when I'm winning? Or was I just taught to believe that by people who were also frightened and insecure? Is it true that the world is out to get me? Or am I choosing the hardest path because I don't think I deserve the ease of a peaceful life? That moment of seeing, that willingness to sit in the cold, hard discomfort of the real question instead of the comfortable, defensive story, that is the click. And once it happens, something shifts. It's not a loud noise. It's a quiet settling, like a gear finally finding its place after grinding for a century. When you realize that the life you were chasing was just an illusion, a screen you were projecting your old needs for validation onto, the failure itself starts to shrink. It stops being a catastrophe and it just becomes an event, a human experience. You didn't lose your big break. You lost the latest opportunity to ignore who you really are. I sat there at 100 years old and I realized that my bank balance in 1932 wasn't a tragedy. The tragedy was that I spent the next 70 years trying to prove I wasn't worthless because of it. Once I saw that, the shame didn't just hurt less, it evaporated. There was nothing left for it to feed on. The pattern was broken. I was finally freed alive, not just to perform. When you finally break the pattern, when you have the click, something strange happens. For the first time in your life, you might actually experience peace. A quiet life. And you're going to find it incredibly uncomfortable at. First, that you're going to think it's boring. You're going to think you've lost your edge. You're going to feel a strange, subconscious urge to create a problem or to chase a new crisis. Why? Because if you've spent your whole life mistaking stress for purpose, then peace is going to feel like a threat. If your brain is conditioned for the war, the silence feels like an ambush. You've been trained to believe that if you aren't struggling, you aren't growing. But that's just the old fear trying to survive. It knows that in the light of a steady, calm life, it has nowhere to hide. I watched Elias go through this after he retired. When he finally saw his pattern, he realized his quiet life wasn't a defeat, it was the ultimate victory. He had to learn how to live without the adrenaline of the deal or the fight. It took him a long time to realize that being okay with himself in the silence was a much bigger achievement than any trophy he'd ever won in the boardroom. You didn't lose the life of your dreams. You lost an old coat that was way too small for you. It was familiar, sure. It kept you warm in a specific, suffocating kind of way. But it was choking your potential to actually be present. The payoff isn't that you never have another problem. The payoff is that you become someone who doesn't need the problem to feel significant. You stop looking for things to prove your worth, and you start realizing that your worth was never on the table to begin with. You stop being a hunter of validation, and you start being a person who is simply here. Truly here. That I don't have another 100 years to give you. I've told you the best of what I know about this long, winding road we call a life. If this conversation made something stir in your chest, if you felt that click, even just a little bit, then do not walk away from it. There's a whole lot more to this, like why we fight so hard to stay in our own misery, even when the door is wide open. I've seen that play out 1,000 times, too. We're going to talk about that next. Stay with me. The work isn't done yet, and you've got a lot of meaningful living left to do. Let's keep going.